What were the origins of slavery in the United States, and how did it become a central institution in the American South? Slavery in the United States had its origins in the forced labor of indigenous peoples and the enslavement of Africans by European colonial powers in the Americas. The institution of slavery took on a distinct form in the American South, where it became central to the plantation economy and the production of cash crops such as tobacco, cotton, and sugar. The growth of slavery in the South was fueled by a variety of economic, social, and political factors, including the demand for labor to cultivate large-scale agricultural operations, the availability of fertile land, and the maintenance of white supremacist power structures. Slavery in the United States was formally legalized in 1662 and lasted until the end of the Civil War in 1865. How did the experience of slavery differ between different regions and time periods in the United States, and what factors contributed to these differences? The experience of slavery varied widely depending on the region and time period in the United States. For example, slavery in the Upper South, such as Virginia and Maryland, tended to involve smaller farms and a more diversified economy, with enslaved people performing a wider range of tasks. In the Lower South, such as South Carolina and Georgia, slavery was more concentrated on large-scale plantations and the production of staple crops like rice and cotton. The nature of slavery also varied over time, with changes in the economy, technology, and political landscape contributing to shifts in the institution. For example, the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 made cotton production more profitable and increased demand for enslaved labor in the Deep South. The expansion of the domestic slave trade in the early 19th century led to the forced relocation of enslaved people from the Upper South to the Lower South. Other factors that contributed to differences in the experience of slavery included the gender, age, and skill level of enslaved people, as well as the attitudes and practices of individual slaveholders. In some cases, enslaved people were able to carve out a degree of autonomy or negotiate for better treatment from their owners. However, in most cases, slavery involved brutal physical labor, constant surveillance and control, and the denial of basic human rights and freedoms. Some text goes here. What were some of the key economic, social, and political forces that shaped the institution of slavery in America, and how did these forces change over time? Some text goes here. The institution of slavery in America was shaped by a complex interplay of economic, social, and political forces. Economically, the growth of the transatlantic slave trade in the 17th and 18th centuries was fueled by the demand for labor to cultivate cash crops such as tobacco, rice, and cotton in the colonies. In the South, the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 revolutionized the production of cotton, making it a highly profitable crop and leading to a massive expansion of slavery in the region. Socially, the institution of slavery was deeply intertwined with the development of a racial hierarchy that placed white people at the top and people of African descent at the bottom. The ideology of white supremacy was used to justify the enslavement of Africans and their descendants, and to maintain a system of oppression that lasted for centuries. Politically, slavery played a key role in the development of the United States as a nation. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was marked by intense debates over the issue of slavery and its place in the new republic. The Three-Fifths Compromise, which counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation in Congress, was a key compromise that allowed the Constitution to be ratified. Over time, these economic, social, and political forces changed in various ways. The abolitionist movement gained momentum in the early 19th century, leading to the end of the transatlantic slave trade in 1808 and the eventual abolition of slavery in the United States with the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865. However, the legacy of slavery and its impact on American society and culture has persisted long after its formal abolition. What was the impact of slavery on the lives and well-being of enslaved people, and how did they resist and rebel against the system of slavery? Slavery had a devastating impact on the lives and well-being of enslaved people in the United States. Enslaved people were treated as property, with no legal rights or protections. They were subject to brutal physical punishment, sexual exploitation, and forced separation from their families and communities. Enslaved people were denied access to education, healthcare, and basic necessities, and were forced to work long hours in harsh and dangerous conditions. Despite these conditions, enslaved people resisted and rebelled against the system of slavery in a variety of ways. Resistance took many forms, from acts of everyday defiance and sabotage to organized revolts and escape attempts. Enslaved people used their knowledge and skills to undermine the system of slavery, by breaking tools, slowing down work, and feigning illness. Some enslaved people also engaged in organized resistance, such as the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804, the largest and most successful slave rebellion in history. Enslaved people also resisted slavery through cultural practices, such as music, dance, and religion. These practices served as a means of communication and solidarity, and helped to preserve African cultural traditions in the face of the brutal system of slavery. Despite the risks and dangers involved, enslaved people continued to resist and rebel against slavery throughout its existence. Their actions played a crucial role in bringing about the eventual abolition of slavery and the recognition of the inherent dignity and worth of all human beings. Some text goes here. How did the abolitionist movement and other social and political movements work to end slavery in the United States, and what challenges did they face along the way? Some text goes here. The abolitionist movement was a social and political movement that aimed to end slavery in the United States. The movement emerged in the late 18th century and gained momentum in the early 19th century, fueled by a combination of moral, religious, and political arguments against the institution of slavery. Abolitionists used a variety of tactics to advance their cause, including public speaking, writing, and organizing. They published newspapers, pamphlets, and books to educate the public about the evils of slavery and to call for its abolition. Abolitionists also worked to support the Underground Railroad, a network of secret routes and safe houses used by enslaved people to escape to freedom in the North. Despite their efforts, the abolitionist movement faced many challenges along the way. Slavery was deeply entrenched in the economy and social structure of the South, and many white Americans were opposed to abolitionist efforts. Abolitionists faced threats, violence, and legal persecution for their activism, and many were jailed or even killed. The Civil War, which began in 1861, was a turning point in the fight against slavery. The war was fought primarily over the issue of slavery, and the Union's victory in 1865 led to the passage of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude throughout the country. The legacy of the abolitionist movement continues to be felt in the United States today, as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up against injustice and oppression. Some text goes here. What was the impact of the Emancipation Proclamation and the end of the Civil War on the institution of slavery in America, and how did it shape the course of American history? Some text goes here. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, declared that all slaves in Confederate territory were to be freed. The proclamation did not immediately free any slaves in Union territory, nor did it end slavery as an institution in the United States. However, it did make the abolition of slavery a central goal of the Union's war effort and signaled a major shift in American history. The end of the Civil War in 1865, with the victory of the Union forces over the Confederacy, led to the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which officially abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States. This was a momentous event in American history, marking the end of one of the most dehumanizing and oppressive systems in the country's history. The impact of the Emancipation Proclamation and the end of the Civil War on the institution of slavery was profound. Millions of enslaved people were freed from bondage, and the legal foundation of slavery was eradicated. However, the end of slavery did not mean the end of racism or discrimination in America. The legacy of slavery and its impact on Black Americans continues to be felt to this day. The Emancipation Proclamation and the end of the Civil War also had a broader impact on American history, shaping the course of politics, social relations, and cultural development in the country. The abolition of slavery paved the way for the civil rights movement of the 20th century and other struggles for equality and justice. It also marked a turning point in the relationship between the federal government and the states, as the power of the federal government was strengthened and the institution of slavery became a thing of the past. How has the legacy of slavery and racial discrimination continued to shape American society and politics in the decades since its abolition, and what steps can be taken to address these ongoing inequalities? The legacy of slavery and racial discrimination has continued to shape American society and politics long after its abolition. Despite the official end of slavery, Black Americans faced systemic discrimination and violence, including Jim Crow laws, segregation, lynchings, and police brutality. These forms of discrimination have contributed to ongoing racial disparities in areas such as education, housing, employment, and health. In recent years, issues of systemic racism and police brutality against Black Americans have gained renewed attention in the United States, sparked in part by the Black Lives Matter movement. These issues have also been brought to the forefront by high-profile incidents of police violence against Black Americans, such as the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020. To address these ongoing inequalities, many advocates and activists have called for systemic changes in areas such as criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, and housing. These changes may include policies such as increased funding for social services, anti-discrimination laws, police reform, reparations for slavery, and affirmative action programs. Other approaches to addressing the legacy of slavery and racial discrimination include public education campaigns to raise awareness about the history and ongoing impact of racism, and efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of American society. Ultimately, addressing the ongoing legacy of slavery and racial discrimination in the United States will require sustained and comprehensive effort across many areas of society. It will require a commitment to systemic change and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths of America's history in order to build a more just and equitable future for all. What role has the study of slavery and its impact on American history played in the broader field of historical research and scholarship, and what insights can it provide for understanding the past and present? The study of slavery and its impact on American history has played a significant role in the broader field of historical research and scholarship. By examining the ways in which slavery shaped American society and politics, historians can gain insight into the social, economic, and political systems that have influenced American history. Scholarship on slavery has also highlighted the perspectives and experiences of marginalized groups, particularly enslaved people and their descendants. This research has illuminated the ways in which these groups have shaped American history and contributed to the development of American culture. In addition to its insights into the past, the study of slavery and its impact on American history can also provide important context for understanding contemporary issues related to race and social justice. By examining the ways in which systemic racism and inequality have been perpetuated over time, scholars can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by marginalized communities today. Moreover, the study of slavery and its impact on American history can also shed light on the ways in which individuals and groups have worked to challenge and resist systems of oppression. This research can provide inspiration and guidance for contemporary movements seeking to promote social justice and create more equitable societies. Overall, the study of slavery and its impact on American history is essential for understanding the complexity of American society and politics, and for working towards a more just and equitable future. How has the cultural and artistic representation of slavery in film, literature, and other media contributed What can we learn from the history of slavery in the United States, and how can this knowledge help us to build a more just and equitable future for all people? The history of slavery in the United States holds important lessons for understanding the ways in which systemic oppression and inequality can shape society, and for working towards a more just and equitable future. By examining the economic, social, and political factors that allowed slavery to flourish, as well as the experiences and resistance of enslaved people, we can better understand the ways in which power and privilege are constructed and maintained. In addition, understanding the lasting legacy of slavery and its impact on American society can help to inform efforts to address ongoing racial disparities and inequalities. This includes examining and dismantling systemic racism in areas such as housing, education, and the criminal justice system, as well as promoting greater equity and inclusion in all aspects of society. By learning from the mistakes of the past, we can work towards building a more just and equitable future for all people, regardless of race or ethnicity. Some text goes here. How did the transatlantic slave trade contribute to the growth and spread of slavery in the Americas, and what impact did it have on the lives and experiences of enslaved Africans? Some text goes here. The transatlantic slave trade, also known as the triangular trade, played a central role in the growth and spread of slavery in the Americas. It involved the forced transportation of millions of Africans from their homes in West and Central Africa to the Americas, where they were sold into slavery. The slave trade had a devastating impact on the lives and experiences of enslaved Africans. They were forcibly separated from their families and communities, subjected to brutal and dehumanizing conditions during their transportation across the Atlantic, and forced to labor under harsh and often deadly conditions in the Americas. Enslaved Africans were viewed as property rather than people, and were treated accordingly. They were subjected to physical and sexual violence, denied access to education and basic human rights, and often worked to death in brutal conditions on plantations and in other industries. The slave trade also had a lasting impact on African societies, disrupting economies, social structures, and cultural traditions. The legacy of slavery and the slave trade continues to be felt in Africa and the Americas to this day, and has contributed to ongoing racial disparities and inequalities. Despite the unimaginable suffering and dehumanization of enslaved Africans, they also demonstrated remarkable resilience, strength, and resistance. Enslaved people found ways to resist their enslavement through acts of rebellion, sabotage, and escape, and ultimately played a crucial role in the abolition of slavery in the Americas. Some text goes here. What were some of the major legal and political developments related to slavery in the United States, such as the Dred Scott decision and the Fugitive Slave Act, and how did they shape the institution of slavery? Some text goes here. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 was a landmark legal ruling by the Supreme Court that declared that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, could not be considered citizens of the United States and therefore had no legal standing to sue in federal courts. This ruling further entrenched the institution of slavery by denying African Americans any legal recourse to challenge their status as property. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was another major development related to slavery in the United States. This law required that runaway slaves be returned to their owners, even if they had fled to a free state. The act also imposed heavy penalties on anyone who aided or harbored fugitive slaves, and empowered federal officials to deputize citizens to help capture runaways. The Fugitive Slave Act was highly controversial and sparked significant opposition from abolitionists and other opponents of slavery. What role did religion play in the institution of slavery in the United States, and how did enslaved people use religion as a means of resistance and empowerment? Religion played a complex role in the institution of slavery in the United States. While many slave owners used Christianity to justify and maintain their power over enslaved people, enslaved Africans and their descendants often used religion as a means of resistance, empowerment, and community building. Enslaved people drew on a range of religious traditions, including Christianity, Islam, and traditional African religions, to make sense of their experiences and to assert their humanity and dignity. Some enslaved people interpreted the Christian message of freedom and liberation as a call to resist slavery and fight for their rights. They often relied on clandestine religious gatherings, such as secret church services or invisible prayer meetings, to express their faith and to build a sense of community and solidarity. Others drew on Islamic traditions to resist slavery, and some even used their knowledge of Arabic to communicate secretly with one another and plan rebellions. Religious beliefs and practices also played a key role in the formation of African American culture and identity. Enslaved people created their own religious music, such as spirituals and gospel songs, which expressed their hopes, dreams, and struggles. These musical traditions helped to preserve African cultural heritage and provided a way for enslaved people to assert their humanity and dignity in the face of oppression. How did the experiences of enslaved women and children differ from those of men, and what unique challenges did they face within the system of slavery? Enslaved women and children faced distinct challenges within the system of slavery. Women were subjected to sexual violence and exploitation by their masters and were often forced to bear children who would also be enslaved. They also faced the burden of domestic labor and childcare, in addition to agricultural or other physical labor. Enslaved children were separated from their families and forced to work at an early age, often being subjected to physical and emotional abuse. Despite these challenges, both women and children played important roles in resisting and subverting the system of slavery. Women often served as leaders in slave revolts and uprisings, while children were sometimes able to escape slavery by passing as white or finding other means of escape. Some text goes here. How did the legacy of slavery contribute to the development of the Jim Crow era and other forms of institutionalized racism in the United States, and what impact did these systems have on African American communities? Some text goes here. The legacy of slavery contributed significantly to the development of the Jim Crow era and other forms of institutionalized racism in the United States. After the Civil War and the end of slavery, Southern states implemented a series of discriminatory laws and policies that aimed to maintain white supremacy and control over African Americans. These laws, known as Jim Crow laws, enforced segregation in public spaces, education, housing, and employment, among other areas of life. They effectively denied African Americans the same rights and opportunities as white Americans, and perpetuated a system of racial inequality and discrimination. The legacy of slavery and the Jim Crow era have had a lasting impact on African American communities, shaping their experiences and opportunities in a range of ways. This legacy has contributed to persistent racial disparities in areas such as education, health, housing, employment, and criminal justice. It has also shaped the cultural and social fabric of the United States, influencing perceptions and attitudes towards race, ethnicity, and identity. In recent years, there has been increased attention and action around addressing the legacy of slavery and racism in the United States, including efforts to promote racial justice, equity, and reconciliation. These efforts have included initiatives such as reparations, affirmative action policies, and Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, among others. Some text goes here. What are some of the ongoing debates and controversies surrounding the legacy of slavery in the United States, such as reparations and the role of Confederate monuments, and how are these issues being addressed in modern society? Some text goes here. There are ongoing debates and controversies surrounding the legacy of slavery in the United States. One of the most significant is the issue of reparations for the descendants of enslaved people, as many argue that the economic and social disadvantages faced by African Americans today are a direct result of the centuries of slavery and institutionalized racism that have preceded them. There is also ongoing discussion around the role of Confederate monuments and symbols, which many see as glorifying a legacy of racism and oppression. Some argue that these monuments should be removed or contextualized, while others argue that they are important pieces of history and should be preserved. Additionally, there is ongoing debate around the extent to which racism and discrimination continue to shape American society today, and what steps can be taken to address these ongoing issues. Many argue that systemic racism remains a pervasive problem in areas such as law enforcement, education, and healthcare, and that more needs to be done to address these disparities. Others argue that progress has been made and that efforts to address systemic racism are unnecessary or even counterproductive. How have historians and scholars grappled with the complexities and ethical considerations of studying and interpreting the history of slavery, particularly as it relates to issues of power, representation, and memory? Historians and scholars have grappled with the complexities and ethical considerations of studying and interpreting the history of slavery, particularly as it relates to issues of power, representation, and memory. One key challenge is the need to approach the study of slavery with sensitivity and nuance, recognizing the human dignity of enslaved people and their experiences of trauma and oppression. At the same time, scholars must also grapple with the ways in which the legacy of slavery continues to shape American society, and the ongoing impact of systemic racism and inequality. Another challenge is the need to critically examine the sources and narratives that have traditionally shaped our understanding of slavery, many of which have been shaped by racist ideologies and assumptions. This requires a commitment to uncovering overlooked or silenced voices and perspectives, as well as a willingness to challenge dominant narratives and interpretations. Finally, scholars must also consider the role of their own positionality and biases in shaping their research and interpretations, and work to engage in ongoing critical self-reflection and dialogue with diverse communities and perspectives. By grappling with these complex and difficult issues, historians and scholars can contribute to a deeper understanding of the history of slavery and its ongoing impact on American society.